What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist. Revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
Hi, this is David Gross, and along with co-host Tom Semioli, we want to welcome you to another edition of Notes from an Artist. This past Friday, we had a fantastic conversation with John Altman. We could technically call this John Altman Part 3 because if you remember, last year we had a conversation that was broken into two parts. When we last spoke, John told us he would be releasing his new book, The Hidden Man, in February 2022. And having gotten our copies, Tom and I wanted to meet with John and talk about his new book. By the way, the book is a real treat for just about everyone, so let's get started. Hi, Tom. Hi, John.
Welcome, John. Welcome, John.
Hello.
David, he is the third returning guest. We had Ron Carter return. He came back to us twice. And we had your colleague, Dave Swift from Jules Holland, later with Jules Holland, the bass player, Jules Holland. He has been our returning guest. Now, you are also a returning guest, David, and in honor of John Altman, I'm wearing my John Altman cap. Now, if you got the book Hidden Man here, you can see that we are wearing the same caps. And true story, David, when I'm at singles bars or late night after hours parties, people mistake me for John Altman. And let me tell you, it's you get the best seat in the restaurant. All sorts of perks when people think you're John Altman.
No food, but the best seat. Yeah.
No food.
That's it.
Exactly.
That's it. You haven't had any odd charges on your credit card, have you, John?
I better check.
Right.
Really.
Maybe
well, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to be here.
Good to be here. Well, congratulations on your book, Hidden Man.
Thank you.
And that's what we want to start off with now. You would think that it's easy to write an autobiography. David and I have talked to several authors. Would think it would be easy to write a book about John Altman because, after all, you are John Altman and you've been there the whole time. Was this an easy book to write? I know you keep diaries, but what about the process of putting it all together?
Well, I've always enjoyed writing, and I have 2 English degrees, so I can write. I know I can write. The big problem really was the structure, which I'm sure a lot of writers will say. And what I did was I went chronologically up to the end of the 70s, and then it became impossible because I was in so many pies. A year-by-year summary would have just been crazy. Well, I did this film, and then I was on this TV show, and then So I decided then to divide it up into films and commercials, live gigs, records, LA, and it all fell into place. And it meant that I could jump from, say, a movie I'd done in the 90s back to the 80s, forward to the 2000s, and link things up. And it became a lot easier to do, to get a handle on, definitely.
John, at any point, did you confirm stories with those who are still around that experienced it?
A couple of the stories I did confirm, yes. I have to say, there's a story in the book about my friend Pete Van Hook being in a racing team full of drummers. All the drummers are mad about motor racing, as you can imagine. The story I always understood was that Pete didn't have any gear. He turned up in jeans and a T-shirt, and a very proper drummer who I won't name said, "You can't go in on the track looking like that. Get yourself some clothes." So he went into the changing room and saw a guy changing and said, "Can I borrow your gear?" And the guy said, "Yeah, go ahead." And he walked out. Now, I always understood it was Emerson Fittipaldi's gear. I checked with Pete, and it was actually Ayrton Senna, which is probably a better story. He came out with Ayrton Senna world champion on his gear. So I double-checked that. And there was also how we put together the music for the Secret Policeman's Ball. I always thought that my cousin had got Jeff Beck because he was his drummer.
Okay.
And I checked with Martyn Lewis, and I found out that he'd phoned Eric Clapton, and Eric said, "Can I bring a friend?" And the friend was Jeff Beck.
That was Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck at the Secret Policeman's Ball, doing Further On Down the Road. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
There was something really interesting about the beginning of the book. I was talking with Tom about it the other day. It's that you really had no choice. You really had no choice.
None.
And it's funny where you mentioned the fact of name dropping. And yeah, we all have friends that do, but you can't. It's almost comical.
I know. It's my life.
I was also telling Tom, I said, the latter part of the book, which is fascinating, is all great stuff, but it's pre-John's birth that really sets everything up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. 100%. I mean, how can you go wrong with Jack Benny showing up in your front room and you not having a clue who he was, except for the guy who left stains from his dyed hair on the sofa? The black boot polish.
There was a Glenn Miller track on Sirius XM the other day, 1941. And I was thinking, I wonder if Wolf was playing on it.
Well, he got to know Glenn Miller in England when Glenn came over with the Army Band in the mid-40s, 44. So he wouldn't have known Glenn before then. He certainly played with him when he was in London. But
possibly John Altman's uncle, Wolf Phillips, is on that playing trombone. They were introducing the great Jimmy Doolittle to the troupe. So this is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
Even more interestingly, I think, they used to go out on the town together. It was forbidden for officers and enlisted men to mix socially. Oh. So Wolf had to change into civilian gear to actually go out anywhere. And also, bizarrely, Wolf was playing with my other uncle, Sid, and the head of the Royal Air Force was in the audience dancing with whoever he was dancing with. And my uncle thought, oh, God, I'm for it now. He's seen me out of uniform. And he just danced up to the bandstand and waved and went off. And
that was our guest John Altman's uncle, Sid Phillips, and his band doing Boogeyman. What a great clarinetist. This is Notes from an Artist at cygnusradio.com.
A story I didn't put in, he led the Royal Army Medical Corps band at the age of 21, and he was a private, and he couldn't give musical orders to the band. He had to have an officer standing next to him. So he would say, tell the French horn he's out of tune. And the French horn, you're out of tune. And then the French horn player, who was a sergeant, said, tell the conductor to get his hair cut. Get your hair cut. Army discipline.
That was Here's a Health Unto His Majesty, the Royal Army Medical Corps. And that was what they call a quick march. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
Now, it is Terry Gillam who gives the book its title, Hidden Man. Mm-hmm. But really, in your entire career, you kind of are in plain sight to your colleagues.
To the colleagues, yes. Yeah. I mean, I never when I joined Hot Chocolate, I saw the sort of goldfish bowl that Errol Brown, the singer, lived in, and my friend Lenny Henry, the comedian. And I just thought, well, I don't want that as part of my life.
Everyone's a winner. That was Hot Chocolate, and this is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
I don't want to go around holding up a pen for autographs and people saying, oh, why aren't you as funny anymore? Or why is your music not as good as it used to be? Which I would hear. People had no shame in sort of appropriating figures to their own devices. I mean, the great story Bill Wyman tells is he's stopped by people who say, Rolling Stone, I bet you gather no moss. And he says, oh, that's a good one. I've never heard that one before.
We interviewed Mark Myers from Jazz Wax. Mark just recently came out with a book about rock concerts. And he was talking about how, Tom, do you remember this? It was in our part 2 of the interview, where he says that the hippies in 1969, it was almost, we'll buy your records, but you have to do a free concert. Do you remember that, Tom?
Yes, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, the evolution of the rock concert, where I guess there was still that idea that rock stars or performers, they could identify them more. They weren't a class above them, even though they were really wealthy celebrities, even though they all wore the same uniform.
The point I'm trying to bring up in this, because there is a point. You're saying how, either it was Lenny Henry, you're not as funny anymore. It's almost as if they feel like they're in a position where they could say whatever they want. It's almost like, well, we buy your stuff, so
we own you. Yeah.
We own you. Exactly.
Totally. And that's a very interesting point Tom brought up, and you. In the UK, certainly up to about 1970, if you wanted to see Cream or Fleetwood Mac or Jimi Hendrix, you'd go upstairs in the pub. You wouldn't go to a stadium. You would literally be in the same room as the band. And this is how I got to play with everyone, because
right.
I would just take a saxophone along and say, "Oh, can I play with you?" And nobody ever said no, ever. I don't know why, but nobody ever said, no, we don't allow that. Later they did, because I would show up at gigs with people I'd played with for years, and I'd be stopped at the side of the stage while the band were on stage looking at me going, come on. And there'd be a guy barring my way, and I'd have a saxophone on, and I'd say, look, they're asking for me to go on. Said, I'm sorry, you can't. Manager's orders, no more jamming. And that's when it all changed.
You mentioned that in your book. I mean, you were an incredibly gifted network, from, Muddy Waters playing your birthday party to gigs with Kevin Ayers and Peter Green and Jimi Hendrix. But this is a guy who just walks up with his saxophone and says, let me join in. That's incomprehensible in my generation.
It's incomprehensible to me. If I were me now at that age, I don't think I'd do it. I can't fathom. Well, I can fathom how I got the nerve to do it. And getting the nerve to do it was literally a part of that thing where they were in your pub.
Right, okay.
I mean, if they'd have been at the Fillmore East, there's no way I would have done it, But if they're upstairs in a bar and you've been standing at the bar with them, and somebody who knows you or them says, oh, you should let him have a play, he's really good, they take you up on it. It doesn't matter who it was. It was, John Martyn or Peter Green or Nick Drake or whoever it was. You'd be up there.
Now, of course, obviously, you probably have more of a comfort zone because you grew up in a musical family. You knew no other life, and you were a musician. Yeah. Do you think part of the reason that is that rock and roll, or jazz at that point, or permutation of both, was not an accepted facet of the entertainment industry? It was still on the fringe.
Niche.
Rock and roll. Yeah, right. Rock and roll was not, it was music for teenagers, even though there were great players in there, but it wasn't yet an accepted part of show business. So that was okay to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd never really thought about that. I mean, people like, let's say, on the one hand, Nick Drake and John Martyn weren't household names.
Right.
They weren't even sort of names in a pub to draw a crowd. Right. They were niche people.
You were just listening to Pink Moon by Nick Drake and So Much in Love with You by John Martyn. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
However, groups like Fleetwood Mac were already having chart success. John Mayall, Cream, Hendrix eventually, although when he first came, nobody knew who he was.
That was an incredible set of 4 tunes. We first heard Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac doing Need Your Love So Bad. We then went to John Mayall and the Blues Breakers doing All Your Love, then Cream doing Rolling and Tumbling, and we finished up with Jimi Hendrix Experience doing Are You Experienced. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Let's get back to our interview with the great John Altman.
They were known, as you say, it was a teenage thing, and nobody saw it as a long-term career, for example. I mean, Charlie Watts said to Dave Green, I'll be out of that band in 2 years, if I'm lucky.
Right, it was before rock music and pop music really became an industry. And of course, you had more opportunities in those days because there were scores of indie labels.
I think there were 2 things about that, though. The first was so many of the musicians coming out of Britain, it was post-war. They were virtually blue-collar. I mean, do you remember Ringo? I remember there was an interview where he says, when this is over, I'll have a string of beauty salons.
Oh, totally. It was a different mentality. Nobody saw a longevity to it. It was something you did. It's like being a soccer player or something. You did it for as long as you could do it, and then you went off and did something else proper. And the thing was, in the 50s, of course, certainly in the UK, you saw the rise of the teenager. Before that, they were young adults. There was no in between. You left school, you went into your work, and you became a young adult, and you dressed like one. And it was probably only sort of around the time of Rock Around the Clock that there was suddenly music that alienated the older generation, but you identified with it.
That was Bill Haley in the Comets' Rock Around the Clock. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Before that, everybody listened to Johnny Ray or Frankie Lane. Everybody. Yeah. There was no teenage music made by teenagers.
Which is an interesting point, John, because if you think about it, even Cashbox and Billboard in the 60s only had one chart. Frank Sinatra and the Beatles were vying for the same thing.
Side by side. Yeah. Well, I remember, which you'll remember, was it the Hollywood Palace show where Dean Martin introduced the Rolling Stones?
The Rolling Stones, the Hollywood Palace, Dean Martin. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. CygnetRadio.com.
He was just sort of winking at the audience and laughing, look at this lot. And the Stones are interesting because I came on the scene probably as a 15, 16-year-old, and it was slightly later than the Stones had broken it. Mm-hmm. But they had gone from tiny clubs to big stadiums in America in months. It wasn't like a 6-year plan or anything. Therefore, when I became friendly with Bill Wyman, we had the same reference points. The club where they rehearsed, I used to play at. And we both were, do you remember Pat and Vi made the cups of tea? And, so we had a shared memory. It wasn't like, I played at the original Cavern, 1970, I think. That's only 7-8 years after the Beatles were there. And when we did the Ruttles, it was 7 or 8 years after the Beatles had broken up.
That was the Ruttles doing Ouch. This is Notes from an Artist at CygnetRadio.com.
All the reference points were there. It wasn't archaic. It wasn't, 50 years ago, Nick Drake made a record. Let's all reverentially sit there and worship it and idolize him. It was, that guy plays music. Do you know what? He doesn't like gigging. Maybe I should talk to him and tell him to carry on. That's what happened. That's what happened.
Right, it's only now that it's considered a legacy. But I think in chapter 3, to me, it sets the tone for your career. When you talk about your eureka moment, you're at John Hart's house, and there's a jam session set up by Earl Palmer of the Wrecking Crew, the great Earl Palmer.
No, it was Philly Joe Jones.
Wow, it was Philly Joe Jones. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're in this jam session, but you play the melody and then you solo. And as you say, you tell a story. And you were not in competition with everyone else, which is what usually jam sessions are. And right there, you set yourself apart from everyone else, which set the tone for your entire career.
No, it's absolutely right. That is exactly as it happened. And it was fear because I'd been playing for 3 years. And there were these guys ripping off Coltrane licks and altered scales and, extending chords. And I just thought, I can't do any of that. It's beyond me. Plus, I don't understand why I would want to do that. Mm-hmm. And so when I started, I played one note and then I played another note and then I joined the two together. And I suddenly went, hello, this is the way to do it.
But I think the way you gain the respect of your peers is you put the music first. And your peers recognize this because, David, you might be shocked about this, but one of the elements of show business is a lot of the times people put their personality first before the art. But you put the music first. Yeah, I know. See, David, you've been doing that for 50 years. But by putting the music first and serving the music, you got the instant recognition of your peers. And you just know that from being on the bandstand. You know when somebody's showing off and you know when somebody's really playing. And the guys who play to the music, those are the guys that get all the work. They may be hidden men among their colleagues and in the industry. They're overt men.
Another story that I didn't put in the book, which I was thinking maybe I should have, but when I was playing with Muddy Waters, we were playing a slow blues. Like it must have been something, obvious. It must have been Gypsy Woman. I got a solo and 2 choruses and I played it. And towards the end of the second chorus, I thought, he can't really hear what I can do. So I'm just going to show him that I don't just do this. And I played a tricky run. And as soon as I did it, I thought, that was a stupid thing to do. And he's going to think I'm an idiot because I've just suddenly gone outside the parameters of the style of what we were doing and gone somewhere else that he's not interested in going, The corollary to that, of course, was when I was playing I had a big career, obviously, in writing, but I would always get asked by American blues musicians to be in their band, And people like Lowell Fulson and Phil Guy and R&B singers, they would ask for me because I wasn't just a straight up and down blues player. Lowell Fulson had Stanley Turrentine in his band and Ray Charles. That's what he wanted to hear. He didn't want to hear a basic pentatonic scale on every blues solo. And that's why we got on.
I just love that tune. It's Lowell Fulson, Reconsider Baby. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnetRadio.com.
He said to me, you play like Stanley Turrentine, which I was actually trying to do when we worked together. Again, it's what you said. It's fitting putting what you do into what they do. It's subsuming your own desire, or I wouldn't even call it desire, the idea that, I can do all these things. No, I'm in this genre, so I'm going to do what they're expecting me to do.
Well, again, it's that putting the music first instead of your personality. Yeah. And I think I would have to guess that it served you well as a writer and arranger because you have that player's mentality, that sideman mentality, David, of adapting to the situation. I mean, if you're writing for Telly Savalas and then you go to Two Ronnies and Top of the Pops, you have to be a chameleon, but that is the milieu of the sideman. You are a chameleon. So you adapted that playing style to your production and your arranging style.
Oh, totally. Totally. And of course, I wouldn't write Barry White the way I wrote for Rod Stewart. You just wouldn't do it.
That was Downtown Train, Rod Stewart, with an incredible arrangement created by our guest, John Altman. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
It's two totally different things, or Diana Ross, because if I presented a funk chart to Tom Jones or to The Pretenders, they would look at me and go, what on earth are you giving us? Why have we got this? So you cut your cloth to fit the suit. And I did that playing-wise as well. I wouldn't go on a traditional jazz gig and start playing avant-garde saxophone or anything like that. Might get some funny looks.
So that's probably why, I guess, part of your identity as the hidden man is because you adapted to so many different things. You didn't just remain in one genre. Like you say, the Rolling Stones. We think of the Rolling Stones as a blues rock, but you did much more than that. So that's the reason why you were somewhat hidden.
Well, yeah, because the interesting thing, again, I talk about it in the book, is that some people think of me as a classical conductor. Some people think of me as the sax player who played with Van Morrison. Some people think of me as, oh, yeah, he worked with Little Richard, and Bill Haley, the original Comets. He's a rock and roller.
Or on your first record, saxophonist unknown. I really love the book, John. Yeah, and of course, I know you. So I remember when you were up at the house, we went out to lunch. We just started talking about Peter Green, because he's like one of my heroes. And it was like a tree with all these branches, and it was just rather amazing. But to you, it's not amazing because that's the way it was. But it really goes back to Sid and Wolf. And I really think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to go. I said to Tom, I really like to dig into those first couple of chapters. Tell the audience about your family and how amazing it was.
Well, on my mother's side, my mother had 4 brothers who were all band leaders of one level or another. 3 of the brothers, her older brothers, had the first European jazz band to play in Europe, as opposed to American jazz band. So when they were in Italy, Toscanini came to hear them. And he was bowled over and he said, I'm bringing my friend tomorrow. And he showed up the next night with Puccini. And Puccini said to my uncle, who was 17, I want to learn jazz. Can you teach me jazz? So he started teaching him how to write jazz, and Puccini started showing him orchestrating, and they became mates, and then my uncle went to Puccini's funeral when he passed away, so incredible background to come from. Then my youngest uncle was a staff arranger at Lawrence Wright Music when he was 14, writing for all the big bands. And in fact, there's a record of Isn't This a Lovely Day by the Ambrose Band, which he wrote when he was 14, but they didn't know. They thought it was his brother who'd written it.
That was the Ambrose Band, 1935, doing Isn't It a Lovely Day. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
My mother was friends with Coleman Hawkins, Fats Waller, Connie Boswell, George Shearing. So whenever I was playing music or writing music, she would say, oh, I remember Coleman Hawkins doing this, or I remember being in a pub with Fats Waller, incredible sort of background. And she played stride piano, which she taught herself. And all the brothers had taught themselves. And of course, or they didn't teach himself, my cousin Simon Phillips, who's exceptional drummer, I heard him at the age of 6 playing the way he does now. It's unimaginable, really. He really was. He was great. So the musical side of the family is a gift that we all got. And the thing about gifts is you use them or you abuse them. And I used mine. I mean, for a long time, I probably abused it because I hate to say, because it sounds big-headed, you know, things were easy, came easily. But I could do things that people who went to music college just couldn't do. Mm-hmm. And I could do them in my head. And they had to sit with a piece of paper and a piano and whatever. And I could just sit there and go, oh, yeah, it's like this. When I wrote a lot of arrangements, I would write at the table, not at the piano, and just hear the orchestra in my head and then go, no demos, go straight on the stage and hand out the music. And it sounded exactly as I planned it. So it's a gift.
Yeah, it is a fascinating thing, isn't it, to be able to hear it all? For me, I usually come up with a bass line, write it down, and then build on top. That's my formula. And sometimes when I have a melody, I'll use the computer to, let's hear what it sounds like up a minor third. Let's hear what it sounds like here and there. So eventually you learn to hear it that way, but you always heard it that way. You know, the other thing about when you were a little boy, you would listen to classical music. You'd listen to jazz. Yeah. There was no distinction. It was, as Ron Carter always says, it was the big M. It was music.
Music.
It's either good or it's the other kind, as Duke Ellington would say. It's really a fascinating thing.
It is. And I would get the same emotional response to a Borodin symphony that I would to, I don't know, Tutti Frutti by Little Richard or Earth, Wind and Fire, or it just went across every genre, totally. I never made a distinction until the age when you're supposed to make a distinction. Stories in the book. When I was 7, our teacher said, bring in your favourite record. And I took in Count Basie's Texas Shuffle. Everyone else has got Tubby the Tuba or Rock Around the Clock, and I've got Texas Shuffle. A bunch of 7-year-olds made of Count Basie's Texas Shuffle. I still have no idea.
That was Count Basie, the Texas Shuffle. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
I'll tell you, it's a tough book to read because I kept putting it down, and thanks to YouTube and obviously streaming services to go back and research all the music. An incredible playlist. One of the elements of the book that I found fascinating was you talk about the importance in anyone's musical development of, David, a thing called a jam session, not in front of an audience. And you talk about a great experience you had with Amy Winehouse at the 10 Room, where unbeknownst to most of us, Amy really loved deep tracks. She loved Dinah Washington. She loved Etta James. She loved Billie Holiday. And she called you Sir. How did that?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
3 people have called me Sir in my life, apart from waiters, you know. And the 3 people are Eartha Kitt, who I produced, who kept calling me Sir. And I wasn't sure if she was being ironic or funny or whatever, but she was absolutely lovely. Cyndi Lauper, who came up to me at the Sunset Marquee and said, excuse me, sir, don't I know you from somewhere? And Amy used to say, good evening, sir. You know, it's sort of respect, I guess, because even then I was like the elder. Everybody there was in their 20s or teens almost. And there I am, age 50, you know.
Now, you liken her to Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, and Van Morrison, even in her very brief career.
Yeah, just because she's taken on iconic status. Right. And is it anything to do with me? I don't think so. I mean, so many of the people I work with have become iconic, which is more a testament to the fact that I've worked with so many people than I sought out Bob Marley and thought, he's going to be a legend, or Nick Drake. And I thought, well, you know, one day people will pay thousands of dollars for his first demo record or something like that. But it happened. It happened over and over again. While, as I say, it may be nothing to do with anything that I did, I'm very lucky to have crossed paths with all those people along the way because it's made life much more interesting.
That was Amy Winehouse. I Heard Love Is Blind. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
You did have influence when you were jamming with your, I guess, high school band. His kid sat on a stoop. His dad owned a restaurant. He decided to become a musician. And David, he turns out to be George Michael. So you inadvertently inspired
Who knew?
that career.
I'd like to say I remember a 5-year-old kid running around, but I don't.
Right.
That band in itself, which is a school band, I wasn't at the same school, but I was that age. So everybody was 16, 17. Don't even think anybody had reached 18 yet.
Okay.
But Pete Van Hook went on to Mike and the Mechanics and Van Morrison. Chaz Jankel wrote all the Blockheads records and I Know Corrida for Quincy Jones. Rick Parnell became Mick Shrimpton in Spinal Tap, the exploding drummer. This is our local band. Previous band, our guitarist wrote Walking on Sunshine. So the band before that became Yes. So it's extraordinary, really. Paul Kossoff is on the scene as we are on the scene. Chris Squire is on the scene as we're on the scene. So you've got to know all these people as your contemporaries. And
right. And a casual setting.
Yeah, amazingly, 60 years later, they're all iconic figures in the music world.
And how interesting it is you relate the fact that Kissing a Fool, when George Michael performed that song, and I saw George Michael back in the day, he was lip-syncing to your arrangement. I didn't realize that.
That was George Michael doing Kissing a Fool with the incredible arrangement by our guest, John Altman. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Well, the band certainly were. I think he would be singing it live.
Right.
But the band miming to our track.
You mentioned you didn't get credit for that on the record, even though you got a gold record.
No, as the arranger, no, I never did. Well, there are a few records that I never got credit on. If I'd have been a bit sterner about it, I probably would have done something about it. Made sure that it got put right. But the famous, the tank chase in the James Bond film Goldeneye, which I wrote, a very well-known conductor toured the music of James Bond all over the world, and the percussionist in New York with the New York Philharmonic messaged me, who's a friend of mine, and said, we've just played your tank chase, and on the music it credits Eric Serra as the composer. I went, that is actually not correct. So my manager got onto them and made them change it all, and all the mess about with the PRS and God knows what, because this show had been touring the world for 10 years with the wrong credit.
That was the tank chase from the movie Goldeneye, James Bond, with our guest John Altman doing the arrangement, the composing, the whole ball of wax. And I encourage you, go on YouTube, find that clip, because as great as the music is, it enhances this incredible scene. This is Notes from an Artist, CygnusRadio.com.
People say, I saw that movie and heard your music. And I said, I didn't work on that movie. I don't know what you're talking about. And then they send me a screenshot of a title. And I go, no, I didn't write this. Why are you sending me this? I've never heard of it. And I look down at the bottom, and it's the library company I work for. And they've obviously changed the title and licensed it to the movie, which is great, because eventually I get some money for it. But I haven't a clue where it goes. It's sort of Dancing with the Stars and the Pixar movie and the Great British Bake Off and Peaky Blinders. They're all using my music. It's wonderful.
The amount of work you've done, is it accurate to say that, musicians, we never know where our next gig is coming from? So by nature, to make a living as a musician, you are a workaholic and you don't turn down gigs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, again, very, very lucky, because I was never out of work from the minute I started in the business. I always had something to do.
Right.
But the great thing for me was my work was my hobby. I would spend a whole day maybe writing, and then in the evening I'd go and play somewhere. And the weekends, which most people go, thank heavens I don't have to do anything. I loved working at the weekends because the phone didn't ring. So I could be uninterrupted at writing, So I basically had 7 days a week to work. And it's amazing how much you can do and still get a good night's sleep.
So you've never had a real job, John.
No, I never have. It's very funny, because the scary thing, of course, is that you write and write and write and write for days and days and days and days, and you finish a job and you feel great and you have a shower and go out for a walk, and then your neighbour stops you and goes, hi there, not working then. You just want to throttle them,
Well, it just shows you how Industrial Revolution program mind really thinks a certain way. They don't understand the process.
Totally not. Again, explaining what an arranger is, and you're meticulously explaining it. And I've done it last few weeks as well on radio broadcasts. And you explain and you tell them, and this is what you do, and this is how it's done, and this is how an arrangement happens, and there's silence, and they say, so do you write the words or the music? Where do you go?
Yeah.
Oh, I give up. Okay, I wrote this. It's easier to say you write the songs, because
I think the Southern expression, John, is bless their hearts.
But it is interesting because, and I've said this in the book. If you go up to 20 people and say, "Sing me Baker Street," they'll go da 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 da. That's not Baker Street. That's part of the arrangement. Sing me Careless Whisper. They'll go da 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 ba ba da da. Steve Gregory played that and got £20. Sing me Tears of a Clown. Da 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 ba da da da. Paul Reiser wrote that. Sing me Sweet Caroline. Sweet Caroline. Ba ba ba. Charlie Colella wrote that. So we're in that position where we add so much, but we don't get the songwriting.
You don't get the credit. What happens when you ask somebody to sing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life"?
Same thing. Same thing.
You don't get a royalty for that.
You get a royalty for. I get a royalty for conducting it. I don't get a royalty for actually arranging it. If you ask for one, you'll never work again.
That was the legendary Monty Python tune, "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. That was the legendary Monty Python tune, "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
So now that Hidden Man is out, it's on the shelves. Is it going to be? Is there going to be a Kindle edition of it? Because I think
there is. Yes, I'm also toying with the audiobook route as well.
So, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll do it. I was thinking maybe I should get some big personality to read it, but then a lot of people said, no, we want your own voice. So we shall see. We shall see.
Have Morgan Freeman do the book. Wouldn't that be funny?
That'd be good, wouldn't it? Well, it's like my friend's answer machine. Vincent Price did his answering machine.
Is that right?
Which was wonderful. I mean, it was absolutely marvellous. Shame nobody has answer machines with messages anymore, but he had Vincent Price.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
What's next on the agenda?
Well, I have a big band gig in the book for July. I'm not holding my breath. Mainly talking, I'm doing a few book festivals, which would be interesting, and just seeing really what comes up. I mean, I'm quite happy just to do that at the moment. There's not much. I don't really want to do another movie desperately. I mean, I was delighted and flattered to get asked to work on the Bond film by Hans Zimmer, which I couldn't turn down, and it was a fun assignment, because he basically said just stick some brass on various cues and then conduct all the brass sessions, which I did, which is great fun. And certainly one of the cues I did, the Cuba sequence with Arturo Sandoval, it's probably the most noticed sequence in No Time to Die, which is great.
Any silent films?
No, I mean, I sort of, having done that one, I sort of... a big sigh of relief and thinking, well, I don't have to do that ever again. I'd love to do it live, though. I've done it twice. It'd be great to do it again. Again, the budgets just aren't there anymore. I mean, even I spoke to the person who organised that particular festival, and they basically said, we can't do, you were just about the last one of that run where the orchestra got smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point now where, if they have a solo piano, they're lucky, which is such a shame. But that was great. That was a great experience to do that film.
Yeah, great score too. I enjoyed it.
I had a great time.
All right, David. Well, we've spoken once again to the hidden man in plain sight. There he is. Give our regards to Mr. Bill Wyman. We'd love to talk to him.
I will, yes. He's not been that well lately, but he's well up in his 80s,
Yes, he's still at his hamburger shop.
No, he got rid of all that.
Oh, he did? Okay, right. Yeah, I know he auctioned off all his instruments and things like that.
Yes, he did. I think Charlie's passing hit him pretty hard.
Yeah, sure. I would imagine so.
Because they stayed very close, even after he left the band. I don't think he had much time for any of the others, but Charlie he was very close to.
Yeah.
The documentary was fabulous.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, the quiet one, right?
Well done.
Right. He was going to actually come here to promote it, David, but and I was supposed to interview him, but of course COVID hit and everything.
Yes.
Everything went by the wayside. Let us know, John, when the book comes out in Kindle, so we can put something out on that. And I think absolutely you should do the audiobook. Come on, absolutely.
Oh yeah, no, I'm going to.
There's lots of echo on your voice, and that'll be great.
Moderate it for the international audience. Yes,
that's it. That's it.
All right, John, thanks for talking. We'll be in touch.
My pleasure.
All right,
good to see you.
Wasn't that fantastic? I want to thank our guest, John Altman, and of course, my partner in crime, Tom Semioli, for another fabulous and informative interview. I would encourage all of you to go out, pick up a copy of John's new book, The Hidden Man, and to keep your computer or phone tuned in on YouTube, because as Tom says, you will want to play all of the tunes and search all of the artists profiled throughout this book. I'd also encourage you, if you missed any of our previous shows, want to listen again to the part 1 and part 2 of John Altman, we invite you to all of our podcasts, also titled Notes from an Artist, which you can find on all major podcast players or at notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com. So this is David Gross for Tom Semioli and John Altman. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Have a great week.